Brandon Lake hadn't meant to lie, he just needed the cash. He gripped the steering wheel of the sleek black town car like it might eject him for not belonging. The leather was so smooth it felt like butter under his calloused hands, a far cry from the rusty pickup he usually drove. His neighbor Jorge had begged him to cover his shift as a private driver for the day, just this one ride while he recovered from the flu. Brandon didn't ask too many questions. He needed the money. Rent was overdue, groceries were low, and his 6-year-old daughter Daisy had outgrown her only pair of shoes. He adjusted the mirror and fixed his tie. It wasn't even his. Jorge had tossed it at him with a weak cough and a, "Just drive and keep your mouth shut." The hotel door swung open. High heels clicked against marble. The woman who stepped out was like something out of a movie, tall, poised, with dark, silky hair tied back in a way that screamed money. Her black sunglasses covered half her face, but Brandon saw the sharp cheekbones, the bold red lipstick, and the kind of confidence that made people move out of her way without a word. She didn't wait for him to open the door. She slid in with practiced grace and crossed one leg over the other. "Airport," she said, her voice smooth but clipped. "Private terminal. Wheels up in 45, so no scenic routes." "Yes, ma'am," Brandon replied, trying not to sound as nervous as he felt. She raised an eyebrow at his voice but didn't comment. He pulled out of the hotel's awning and into the Friday morning traffic. For the first few minutes, the car was silent except for the steady beat of turn signals and the occasional honk from impatient drivers. Brandon kept his eyes on the road, but curiosity tugged at him. He glanced in the rearview mirror. She had pulled off her sunglasses and was staring out the window, her expression unreadable. "You're not Jorge," she said suddenly. Brandon's stomach sank.
"No, ma'am.
"He's sick. Just filling in for the day." She looked up, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "You're not a professional driver either." "No," he admitted. "But I can drive safely and I'm on time. That's what matters, right?" She didn't answer immediately. Then she said, "What's your name?" "Brandon. Brandon Lake." She nodded slightly. "Faye Montgomery." Her name hit him like a hammer. That name was everywhere on tech company headlines, finance reports, startup acquisitions. Faye Montgomery was the billionaire CEO of Aris Tech. He'd read about her in a newspaper someone left at the diner where he washed dishes on weekends. He looked back at the road quickly, heat crawling up his neck. He was driving a billionaire. A young, beautiful, powerful billionaire. And he had peanut butter stains on his cuffs from Daisy's breakfast. Faye tilted her head. "How'd you end up behind the wheel today, Brandon?" He hesitated. "Jorge's a friend. I run a small mechanic shop part-time. It's been slow lately. My daughter starts school next week. Let's just say I'm doing what I can." There was a long pause. "You have a daughter?" she asked, her tone softening.
"Yeah."
"Daisy. She's 6. Smart as anything, too. Loves books. And pancakes." A small smile tugged at the corner of Faye's lips. Brandon caught it in the mirror. He couldn't believe this was happening. He was supposed to keep his mouth shut, but something about her made him talk. Maybe it was the way she listened, not politely, but genuinely. The car pulled up to the private terminal. A sleek jet sat on the tarmac, engines humming. A man in a suit rushed to the door, opening it for her. Faye paused before stepping out. "You free tonight?" Brandon blinked. "Tonight? I have a gala. My date bailed. And I've had enough of men who pretend to be something they're not. You're real." He stared at her, stunned. "You want me to go to a billionaire gala with you?" She reached into her bag and handed him a crisp, white envelope. "This is the invite. Wear a suit. I'll have a car pick you up at 6. Then she was gone, striding toward her jet without looking back. Brandon sat in the car for a full minute, blinking. He opened the envelope. It was heavy, embossed with gold lettering. His name had been handwritten inside. He let out a breath. Daisy's never gonna believe this. That evening, Brandon stood in front of his cracked bathroom mirror in the one decent suit he owned, his wedding suit. His late wife had picked it out. It was a bit tighter now, especially around the shoulders, but it would do. Daisy stood on the toilet beside him, staring up at him with wide brown eyes. "You look like a prince," she said, grinning. "More like a mechanic trying to be a prince," he said, fixing his tie. "Are you gonna dance?" Brandon laughed. "I don't think so." A knock came at the door. A chauffeur in a black tux stood outside, holding a garment bag and a box. "From Ms. Montgomery," he said. Inside the box was a new suit, deep navy, tailored to his size. A handwritten note was tucked into the pocket. "Wear this instead. Let me spoil you for once. F." He stared at it, stunned. The fabric felt like it cost more than his rent. He changed quickly, then hugged Daisy tight. Mrs. Leonard from next door would watch her tonight. She'd already fed Daisy dinner and promised to read her 2 stories before bed. The gala was held at the Montgomery Foundation Hall, a massive glass building that looked like a spaceship landed in downtown Manhattan. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, gold accents, and people dressed like royalty. And then he saw her. Faye stood at the top of the marble stairs in a long black gown with a slit that stopped his heart. Her hair was swept to one side, and diamond earrings sparkled under the lights. She saw him and smiled, really smiled. "You clean up well," she said as he reached her. "I feel like I walked into a movie," he said, still stunned. She leaned closer. "Good. You're the leading man tonight." The rest of the night passed in a blur of champagne, string quartets, and whispered conversations. People stared. Faye didn't care. She kept him close, introduced him to people with pride in her voice. At one point, as they stood on a balcony overlooking the city, she turned to him. "You're not like anyone I've ever met." He looked at her, unsure how this woman, this billionaire, could be standing here with him. He didn't know it yet, but something real had started. And neither of them would be the same again. The first thing Faye noticed when she woke the next morning was the silence. Not the kind that wrapped around glass-walled penthouses, but the kind that followed a night that had stirred something sharp and unfamiliar inside her. She stood barefoot near the windows, watching the city blink to life below, still wearing the silk robe she'd thrown on hours ago after tossing and turning through a sleepless dawn. She hadn't meant to enjoy the gala, hadn't planned to feel anything at all. But Brandon Lake, mechanic, father, stranger, had walked into that ballroom like he belonged, even though everyone around him tried to decide otherwise with their eyes. He hadn't tried to impress. He hadn't looked for an angle. And when she introduced him to people who held entire industries in their pockets, he listened with interest and answered with honesty, and not once did he try to be anything other than who he was. It had been years since someone looked at her like that. Not as a name, not as a title, but as a woman. She pulled her phone from the counter and tapped her assistant's number. "Clear my afternoon," she said. "And tell accounting to send a check to Jorge with a bonus. I want to give him a 3-month retainer." There was a pause. "Is the new driver staying on?" Faye hesitated. "He doesn't know it yet. But I'm not done with him." Across the city, Brandon crouched under the hood of a rusted-out sedan, sweat soaking through his shirt as he tightened a bolt with more force than necessary. The garage echoed with the sound of metal meeting metal, a familiar rhythm that usually calmed him. But today, everything felt off balance. He'd spent the night replaying every second of the gala, from the way Faye's fingers had curled around his arm, to the way her laugh had sounded like it hadn't been used in a long time. He didn't belong in her world. He knew that. But the way she'd looked at him. He wiped his hands on a rag as his little girl wandered in from the back office, holding the sandwich he'd packed for her lunch. "Dad, someone's outside." "Fancy car." Brandon stepped into the sunlight and froze. A sleek black SUV idled at the curb. The driver stepped out, holding a rectangular white box with a gold ribbon. Without a word, He handed it to Brandon and returned to the wheel. Inside was a set of keys. A note rested beneath them, written in looping script. Come by the office. I owe you a coffee. Brandon stared at the note like it might vanish if he blinked. Daisy tugged on his jeans. Is that from the lady who made you wear the shiny shoes? He laughed, too surprised to answer. Faye's office took up the top floor of a downtown high-rise. Glass walls, brushed steel furniture, and a view that could swallow the skyline whole. Brandon stood awkwardly in the elevator lobby, holding Daisy's hand. He hadn't wanted to bring her, but Mrs. Leonard had a doctor's appointment, and he wasn't about to leave his daughter with anyone else. The receptionist looked startled when he arrived, but her eyes widened when she saw Daisy. Right this way, Mr. Lake. The door to the corner office opened before they reached it. Faye stood behind her desk, her blazer tossed over the back of a chair, sleeves rolled to her elbows. She looked nothing like the woman from the gala, and yet exactly the same. Her eyes flicked to Daisy, and something in her expression softened. I didn't know you'd be bringing company. I hope it's okay, Brandon said. I didn't have anyone to watch her today. It's more than okay, Faye replied, crouching down to Daisy's height. What's your name? Daisy Lake, she said proudly. I'm 6 3/4. Faye smiled. That's a very important age. Brandon watched, speechless, as this billionaire who could crush CEOs with a single phone call offered his daughter a cup of cocoa and asked if she liked puzzles. Within minutes, Daisy was settled in the corner with a tablet and headphones, completely absorbed. Faye turned to him. I wasn't sure if you'd come. I wasn't sure if I should, Brandon admitted. You sent a car and a key. That doesn't usually mean coffee. It doesn't, she said, walking toward the window. But I'm learning to do things differently. He joined her, hands in his pockets. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone colder. Someone who wouldn't care if a mechanic's daughter wandered into her office. Faye's gaze drifted to Daisy. I wasn't always this person. Brandon didn't press. The silence that followed was comfortable this time. Then she turned back to him. I lied about the coffee. I wanted to see you again. He swallowed hard. Why? Because I haven't laughed like I did last night in longer than I care to admit. Because you make me forget the world wants something from me. He didn't know what to say to that. But his hand brushed hers, and she didn't pull away. I don't fit in your world, he said, voice low. Maybe that's what I need. Before he could reply, the door opened. A man in a designer suit stepped in without knocking. Faye, we need to go over the. He stopped when he saw Brandon. Who's this? Faye's posture shifted. Not defensive, protective. A friend, she said coolly. We're done for today, Marcus. Reschedule. Marcus looked like he wanted to argue. Then his gaze flicked to Daisy, and he thought better of it. With a tight nod, he left. Brandon looked at her. That happen often? More than I'd like. She walked back to the desk and picked up a file. I have to fly out tomorrow. Paris. 3 days. Product launch. Right. But when I get back, she continued, I'd like to have dinner. Just us.
No gala. No cameras.
Brandon nodded slowly. All right. As he turned to collect Daisy, Faye reached into a drawer and pulled out a small wrapped box.
For her, she said.
He opened it outside the building. Inside was a pair of bright purple sneakers, the kind Daisy had circled in a catalog weeks ago. He looked up at the towering building behind him, heart thudding. She remembered, and it terrified him how much that meant. Brandon stood in the middle of his apartment's tiny kitchen, staring blankly at the open fridge. The light flickered once, then steadied. He wasn't hungry. Hadn't been since Faye flew out 2 days ago. He'd spent the time juggling repair work at the shop, grocery pickups, and Daisy's school orientation, anything to keep his thoughts off the woman who'd vanished into a different world at 35,000 feet. She'd left a note with the sneakers. It hadn't said much, just a simple promise. Back soon. But it was the way she'd written his name, like she already knew which part of him would miss her most, that had kept him up more than once. He closed the fridge and turned when Daisy's voice cut through the quiet. "Dad, someone's buzzing." He crossed the room and pressed the intercom. A woman's voice came through, brisk and polite. "Mr. Lake?" "Delivery from Eris Tech." He buzzed her up. The woman handed him a sealed envelope and a sleek black folder. The envelope contained a handwritten invitation dinner at a private restaurant. No press, no entourage. The folder held a discreet background check. His background. Brandon's jaw tightened. He flipped through the page's basic employment history, public records, even an old photo of him and Daisy at a community fair. Nothing invasive, but enough to make his skin crawl. That evening, after Daisy was asleep and Mrs. Leonard had settled in with her crossword puzzle, Brandon stepped out into the cool night air. The car Faye had sent waited at the curb, a dark, polished Maybach, this time with a different driver who said nothing but offered him a bottle of water and a nod. The restaurant was hidden behind an art gallery on the Upper West Side. No sign, no menu, just a single host who waved them through without a word. Inside, the lighting was low and golden, the air filled with the scent of saffron and citrus. Every table was empty except one. Faye sat waiting, her dark hair swept over one shoulder, a silk blouse tucked into high-waisted pants that shimmered in the light like moonlight on water. "You found it," she said as he approached. "I almost turned around twice." "Why didn't you?" "I figured it'd be worse to explain to Daisy that I skipped dinner with a woman who gave her magic shoes." Faye laughed, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. She gestured to the seat across from her, and he sat. "Before we eat," she said, "I owe you something." Brandon raised an eyebrow. "A background check." She winced. "I don't trust easily. You've probably guessed that." "I'm not mad. Just wish you'd ask." "I know. I've had people lie to me for years, investors, partners, even family. I didn't want to find out too late that you weren't who I thought you were. And now, I'm still figuring it out," she admitted. "But I know I don't feel like pretending when I'm with you." Dinner arrived in quiet waves, delicate plates with dishes Brandon couldn't pronounce but liked anyway. They ate slowly, talking about things they hadn't touched before. "Why did you start the shop?" she asked. "It was my dad's. He passed it down to me before he got sick." Said engines made more sense than people. "Do they?" "Most days, yeah. But lately?" He looked at her. "Not so much." She tilted her head. "And Daisy? What's she like when she's not stealing hearts?" "Lately, she's obsessed with marine life. Keeps telling me she's going to be a jellyfish researcher. I didn't even know that was a thing." Faye's smile softened. "She's lucky to have you. I'm the lucky one." They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't feel empty. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. "I want you to come with me next weekend. I'm hosting a charity event in Santa Barbara. It's laid back. Beachfront, no suits." "Faye." She held up a hand. "You'd be there as my guest. No obligations. I just want you there." He looked at the envelope in his hand, at the way her voice caught slightly when she said want. Not need. Not expect. Want. "Then I'll be there," he said. Back at the apartment later that night, after he'd kissed Daisy's forehead and tucked her in, Brandon sat on the edge of his bed and stared out the window. The city lights flickered in the distance, but his mind was somewhere else. He wasn't falling for her. He'd already fallen. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was free falling alone. The sun blazed over the California coast, casting a molten shimmer over the sea as Brandon stepped off the private jet with Daisy's small hand wrapped tightly in his. The breeze carried the scent of salt and orange blossoms, unfamiliar and intoxicating. He adjusted the strap on his duffel bag and glanced toward the waiting SUV, sleek, black, and clearly one of Faye's. She had arranged everything. The school had granted Daisy a few days' absence after call from her office. Mrs. Leonard had been overwhelmed by the sight of the itinerary and insisted Brandon take the opportunity. "A girl should see the ocean once before she's 7, she'd said, pressing a sun hat into Daisy's backpack. The driver opened the door, and Daisy climbed in first, already chattering about sea turtles. Brandon followed, half expecting to wake up back in Queens with grease under his nails and unpaid bills on the table. But then the villa came into view. It wasn't just beachfront, it was practically built into the sand, a modern glass and stone sprawl with wide wooden decks and white drapes fluttering in the breeze. The kind of place people only saw in magazines. As the SUV rolled to a stop, Faye appeared at the top of the stairs, her hair loose, barefoot, wearing linen pants and a sleeveless top that looked like it had been made for the wind to dance through. Daisy waved so hard, she nearly knocked over her backpack. Faye waved back, eyes crinkling. Brandon stepped out, shielding his eyes. "This place real?" "You decide," she said, offering her hand. They walked inside together. The staff was discreet and kind. One of them immediately offered Daisy a tour of the garden and promised her a treasure hunt later. Brandon hesitated, but Faye leaned in. "She'll be with Rosa. She ran the nursery for my sister's twins. Daisy's in good hands." Only then did he let himself exhale. The villa was quiet once the laughter of the child and caretaker faded down the hallway. Faye poured 2 glasses of iced tea and led him out to a shaded veranda overlooking the water. Brandon leaned on the rail. "Your world's quieter than I expected. That's what I built this place for. To disappear when I need to." He glanced at her. "And you brought me here." "I didn't want to disappear this time," she said. "I wanted someone to see it." They didn't speak again for a while. The waves did all the talking. Later that evening, after Daisy had been tucked into a sunlit guest room with a view of the stars, Brandon found himself standing at the edge of a bonfire Faye had lit on the beach. The flames cast long shadows across the sand. She was already there, barefoot again, holding 2 skewers threaded with marshmallows. "I figured you'd know how to roast one without setting it on fire," she said, handing him one. "I'll try not to ruin your billionaire beach aesthetic." "You couldn't if you tried." He crouched beside her, the heat from the fire warming one side of his face. "Have you always been like this?" he asked. Faye tilted her head. "Like what?" "Unpredictable. Unapologetic. Not afraid to chase what you want." "I used to be careful," she said, watching the flames. "I planned everything: school, career, relationships. But I lost someone once. I was too careful, too slow, and by the time I realized what he meant to me, he was gone." Brandon didn't push. Her voice didn't break, but something in her expression shifted like a door opening just a sliver. "I'm not making that mistake again," Faye added. He didn't need her to spell it out. The marshmallows burned a little, but neither of them cared. The next day, the charity event unfolded like a dream. It wasn't a black tie affair, more of a coastal garden party with white tents, live acoustic music, and guests in relaxed designer wear. Brandon wore a collared shirt Faye had chosen for him, and Daisy wore a sundress with tiny sailboats on it, also from Faye, though she'd insisted Daisy had picked it herself. People greeted Faye with respect, but Brandon noticed something else too. They watched her differently when she was with him. Less like an aloof mogul, more like a woman who had finally exhaled. He kept close but not possessive, letting her move in and out of conversations while Daisy clung to his leg between lemonade refills and cookies. Halfway through the event, a man approached him while Faye was speaking to a group of donors. "You're Brandon, right?" the man asked. Tall, mid-50s, expensive watch, but not unfriendly.
"Yeah."
"Can I help you?" "I'm Charles Ritter. I've handled Faye's offshore accounts for the last decade. I've never seen her invite someone into this part of her life before." Brandon narrowed his eyes. "You trying to warn me?" "Just the opposite. I've watched her run herself into the ground for years. always chasing something she couldn't name. Then you show up with your kid, and suddenly she's at peace. So, if you're going to walk away, do it now. I'm not going anywhere. Good, Charles said. That's the first smart thing I've heard all day. The rest of the evening passed in a golden blur. Daisy fell asleep in Brandon's arms on the ride back to the villa. He tucked her in quietly and stepped out onto the balcony where Faye was already waiting with a bottle of wine. She poured him a glass without a word. I was thinking, she said, about what happens when we go back. You mean when I go back to my garage and you go back to running a company that powers half the world? She leaned on the railing beside him. What if there's another option? Brandon turned to her. I've got a proposal, she said. Not a business one. Not a contract. Just a question. I'm listening. I want to buy the building next to your shop, she said. Turn it into a reading center for kids. Daisy can help pick the books. You can run it part-time. I'll take care of the funding. And you won't have to worry about rent again. He blinked. You want to do all that?
For me.
For you.
For her.
For us if you'll let this be something real. He set the glass down and stepped closer. You already know the answer.
But he didn't say it.
He kissed her instead, deep and quiet and knowing. That night, they sat on the back deck as the waves crept in. Faye rested her head on his shoulder. Daisy, still sleeping inside, clutched a stuffed turtle she'd won at the event. The stars blinked overhead like they were in on a secret. And for the first time in a long time, none of them wished they were anywhere else. The first autumn breeze swept through New York like a quiet promise, brushing golden leaves along the sidewalk outside Brandon's shop. The garage doors were rolled open, letting in the crisp air and low hum of the city. Inside, Brandon stood by the counter, flipping through a binder filled with sketches and blueprints. Beside him sat Faye, her laptop open, blazer draped over the back of her chair, bare ankles crossed beneath the stool. Across the lot, construction had already begun on the building next door. The old hardware store had been gutted down to the beams, and now a team of contractors handpicked by Faye's project manager and approved by Brandon worked on transforming it into the children's center they'd envisioned together. Did you see the revised layout for the reading nooks? Faye asked, turning her screen toward him. He leaned closer, their shoulders brushing.
Yeah.
I like this one better. Wider windows. More light. You're starting to sound like an architect. I'm starting to care about things I didn't think I ever would. She met his eyes. That's the point. Daisy darted in from the sidewalk, her backpack bouncing. They're putting in the turtle mural. Ms. Rosa said I could help paint the jellyfish. Faye placed a hand on the child's head, her fingers ruffling gently. Don't forget to sign your name at the bottom when it's done. That way they'll always know who the expert was. Daisy beamed and ran back out, her footsteps echoing against the pavement as she returned to the art table Rosa had set up beside the playground fencing. Brandon watched her go, then turned to Faye. You sure about all this? It's not just a side project anymore. I'm not the kind of woman who does anything halfway. You know that now.
Yeah.
I do. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, weathered notebook. I found this in a box at my place in Santa Barbara. It's a list of things I wrote down years ago. Things I wanted, but never had time for. He flipped it open. A few items were crossed out already. Swim with stingrays, learn Spanish, go to Tokyo without an itinerary. Then, at the bottom of the page, fall in love without strategy. Let it ruin every plan if it has to. He closed the notebook slowly. And I think I've ruined every plan I ever made since I met you. Good, he said. Because I'm making new ones. Before she could ask, he walked around the counter and pulled something from under the shelf. A wooden box, sanded smooth, with a brass latch. He opened it and took out a ring simple, no diamond, but with a strip of copper inlaid around the center, like a vein of light. He held it out. I don't have a yacht or a vineyard or a fleet of private jets, he said. But I've got a daughter who calls you her second favorite person, and a heart that hasn't belonged to me since you stepped into that town car. I want you in her life. Not as a visitor. As part of it. Faye didn't answer right away. She looked down at the ring, then at him, then past him where Daisy was laughing in the sunlight with her brush covered in blue paint. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. I've closed a lot of deals, she said softly. Signed contracts worth more than most people will see in 10 lifetimes. But this is the first time I've ever said yes to something that scared me more than all of that combined. He smiled. So that's a yes? She stepped forward, took his hand, and slid the ring onto her finger. It's a yes. To everything. They kissed, nothing dramatic, nothing practiced. Just a kiss that settled everything between them, like a lock clicking into place. Weeks passed, and the reading center opened with a small ceremony. No press. No fotógrafos. Just a few families from the neighborhood, the children's laughter echoing across the lot, and Daisy standing proudly at the front door with a pair of oversized novelty scissors. Brandon spent mornings under the hood of cars and afternoons reading with Daisy in the corner of the center beneath the wide windows he'd insisted on. Faye split her time between Eris Tech and the neighborhood she'd claimed as home, finally finding balance in the chaos. She traded red carpet galas for PDA meetings, boardroom battles for bedtime stories. They married on the roof of the center, the ceremony small and sunlit. Daisy walked ahead of Faye, scattering petals from a basket that had been hand-painted with jellyfish and stars. Brandon waited under a wooden arch wrapped in ivy and copper wire. When Faye reached him, she took his hand without a word, and they stood like that for a moment, the city behind them and everything ahead. No one gave speeches. They didn't need them. After the vase, Faye crouched in front of Daisy and held out a tiny ring looped on a silver chain. This is for you, she said. Because you're part of this too. And I promise, I'll never let you feel like you're anything less than my family. Daisy threw her arms around her neck, and Brandon knew down to his bones that this wasn't just a wedding. It was a homecoming. Years later, the copper ring still gleamed on Faye's finger as she stood in the center's library, reading to a group of wide-eyed children. Outside, Brandon was helping a teenager change a flat tire, and Daisy, now taller, smarter, and still obsessed with the ocean, was sketching a new mural for the back wall. The world hadn't slowed down, but it had finally started spinning the right way. And in every corner of their lives, in the grease-stained garage, the sun-drenched reading room, the laughter around the dinner table, love lived in the quiet moments, the loud ones, and all the ones in between. They hadn't just found each other. They'd built a life no one saw coming. And it was exactly where they were meant to be.